Welcome. Today we're going to talk about the CAT, the Classics Admissions Test. And I'm delighted to be joined by Ollie Jackson, one of our most experienced CAT tutors. Ollie has a degree from Oxford in Classics and has also done just under 4,000 hours worth of tutoring here at Keystone, not all of which has been the CAT, but he's done a considerable amount nonetheless. So, Ollie, can you tell me a little bit more about the CAT? What is it?
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, the CAT is basically the entrance exam in classics for Oxford University. It's designed really to test the language abilities or potential language abilities of students that want to apply to Oxford. And yeah, it gets sat in November in your upper sixth year before any potential interviews.
And who needs to sit it? Because I know there's a little bit of variance there, and it's utilised in lots of different degree combinations.
Yeah, you're right there. I mean, basically any person that wants to sit a part of classics, even if that's a joint honours degree, needs to take the CAT. So if you're sitting a pure classics degree, of course you have to take that, but also classics in English, classics in modern languages, and a big one is classics in Oriental studies, and they rely quite heavily on the CAT for that. Okay,
so then how is it structured? You know, are there different components for it, given that it kind of transcends quite a few degree types? And do students have to sit all parts?
Yeah, there are three parts to it. So they are section 1, 2, and 3. The first one is Greek, the second one is Latin, and the third one is called the language aptitude test. But you don't have to sit all of them. So lots of classic students will be what are called course 1 students, and these are people that have got Latin and Greek already to A-level, or they will do by the end of their upper sixth. And they need to sit parts 1 and 2 in Latin and Greek to show they've got the right ability in those. Some students may just have taken Latin to A-level or just Greek, and they just have to sit the relevant part. So don't worry about trying to sit the Latin part if you've never studied it. And if you haven't got either of the languages, for example, if you just love the ancient world, but you've never studied Latin because you didn't have the chance, then you sit part 3. This is the language aptitude test, and we'll talk a bit more about what that is in a second. Yeah, in the first 2 parts, you've got Latin and Greek translation, and that's really all you have to do. You get a piece of verse, that's poetry, and a piece of prose, and you just got to translate it into English. They are quite hard, and we'll talk later on about how to prepare best for those. And you've got to put them as best you can into English. You get half an hour for each passage, so an hour for the whole section. The third part, which is the language aptitude test, is a little bit more difficult to explain, but it basically splits into 3 sections. An obscure modern foreign language, this might be Armenian or Cantonese, or something that would be quite unusual for a normal classics speaker or learner to attempt. The second part is a made-up language, and this is almost like a word problem language. It's a completely fake language. Some of the ones in the past have been called Zog and Flop and things, and they are trying to mimic Latin and Greek, and the key rules you need to get to grips with. And the third part is an English grammar and syntax test, just to see how well you know, not key terms, but how well you can piece apart a piece of English. What are the differences between different word usages, and how you might apply that to other languages. So those are the 3 sections of the aptitude test, which is part 3.
And so how hard is it then? Because obviously perhaps you comment on each of the 3 parts. And what's a good score? Or does it not work like that?
So it is pretty challenging, I'll be honest. It's meant to challenge you because Oxford really want to separate the wheat from the chaff. They want to see, have you got what it takes to attempt these languages? But they're not looking for a perfect score. And in fact, there isn't such a thing as a perfect score. So the language one, so Latin and Greek, these are the translations in parts 1 and 2. These are going to be pitched around A-level standard, which might be a bit alarming because you're just going to have started upper sixth when you're doing this. So your A-level is going to be 6 months away. So a bit of preparation to get you up to speed is always a good idea. But they're not looking for you to get 100% like you might want to try and get a high A-level score. It's really how you're approaching the text. They are a bit different from A-level because although they'll be the similar difficulty level, they're going to be using more elements of real Latin and Greek. So they might be taking actual extracts from texts, whereas the A-level is more heavily adapted. So it's worthwhile reading around and doing some wider vocab reading, particularly for those first 2 parts in Latin and Greek. For the aptitude test, well, it's difficult to say how tough or easy it is, because some people find it really, really hard and others find it very, very simple. It depends on how much language experience you've had. If you've never learned another language, you might need to do more work before you approach the paper on it. If you're somebody who is bilingual or has learned a language with cases and with more structure involved, you might actually find it quite enjoyable the first time you do it. But it's still worth preparing for. It can be quite difficult. In terms of score, Ed, which you asked me there is no set score. And the tutors are not looking for 65% or 75%, and that's it, you're in, you're going to interview. Particularly for the aptitude test, that applies. You really shouldn't be thinking about trying to get a certain score. You've just got to do the best you can. And in the first two parts, if you're doing Latin and Greek, it's all about showing what you know. Am I competent in these languages? If I turn up in October after my upper sixth, will I be able to give a good shot at this? And if you can show that, then that's enough to get you invited to interview, along with your whole rest of your application. For the language aptitude, it's about doing as much as you can to show on the page you've got some awareness of how languages work, and you've got some way of decoding them. And again, you don't have to be an expert. Some people don't finish the language aptitude paper, and that's fine. It's about showing what you can on the page.
Great. So I guess the kind of £1 million question: what are your top tips? How does one navigate preparation for this to the best possible manner?
Well, Ed, if you were going to go and sit the CAT this year, here's what I'd suggest you go and do. If you were going to take Latin and Greek, you should firstly make sure your grammar's up to speed. So that's all the stuff you've learned in lower sixth. You need to make sure you're on top of that. And you should also start to look at the things in the rest of your textbook, or that your teacher might have said is coming up in the next year. These are the harder end of the A-level syllabus. So you can have a look at the blog below and see some more details about what those are, but make sure you're up to speed on them. Vocabulary is a big one, particularly for the verse translation in Latin and Greek. Very often, it's riddled with words that you might not have come with at lower sixth. So make sure your vocab is up to speed and that you're reading vocab from a wide range of different authors, particularly, as I said, in the poetry field. And lastly, if you can, try and read some real Latin and Greek. Maybe read it with a translation on the side so you can see any nuances between those languages that you might not pick up in a more watered down version for GCSE or A-level. And of course, the final preparation, lots of past papers. When you're feeling confident in all of those, just practice those papers and see if you can improve, work out which nuances you need to get better at. And again, there's more details in the blog, so have a read of that. For the language aptitude test, there's lots of different ways to approach this. And again, it depends on your ability. It may be you can jump straight in and have a look at some past papers and see how they go, first of all. You may find them just doing past papers is enough to get those language things up to scratch. However, if you're more new to languages and finding your way through them, I'd recommend doing the following couple of things. So have a look at some grammar books for English or for a language that you find interesting. Maybe even a French grammar book that you did once when you were 12, but you've dusted off. Have a look at that. See what the key breakdowns are. Have a look at some verbal reasoning or some word games. These could be things in the back of a newspaper or online, because they often work on the same sort of tricks. So see if you can work out the word differences there, whether they're word meaning or whether they are letter manipulation questions. And lastly, as I said, yeah, past papers are really, really good because it's a very stylized type of test and each part follows the same structure year on year. So if you get familiar with that structure, you'll know what's coming up in November.
Great. Thank you, Ollie. Some really useful top tips there for our viewers to enact. So thank you very much for your time.
Most welcome.